It was a Tuesday night, probably around 1 a.m., and I was utterly exhausted. I'd just finished a double shift at the hospital, and all I wanted was my bed. My car was in the shop, so I was relying on the late-night bus service, which was usually pretty reliable, if a little desolate at that hour. The bus stop was under a flickering street lamp, casting long, dancing shadows that always made me feel a bit uneasy. But tonight, it felt different. The air was heavy, still, almost buzzing with an unheard frequency. When the bus finally rumbled into view, its headlights piercing the gloom, I felt a small wave of relief. It pulled up, the hydraulics sighing, and the doors opened with a hiss. As expected, the bus was empty. Completely and utterly deserted, save for the driver, a man with tired eyes and a bushy mustache, who gave me a nod as I scanned my card. I chose a seat near the front, on the opposite side of the aisle from the driver, wanting to be close enough to feel safe, but far enough to have my own space. The rhythmic hum of the engine and the swaying motion were already lulling me, despite the underlying sense of unease that clung to me. We drove for about 15 minutes, making a few stops where no one got on or off. The city lights began to thin out as we moved towards the quieter residential areas. I was almost dozing when the bus suddenly lurched, braking harder than necessary. I snapped awake and looked up. We were at a stop I didn't recognize. A dark, unlit stretch of road bordered by dense trees on one side and an old abandoned factory on the other. It was definitely not a scheduled stop. My eyes darted to the driver, but he just stared ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his face pale in the dim bus light. Then I saw him. A figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, stepping onto the curb. He was tall, impossibly thin, dressed in an old, threadbare trench coat that seemed to swallow the light around him. A wide-brimmed hat obscured most of his face, but even from my distance, I could feel an intense, suffocating cold radiating from him. He walked slowly, deliberately, towards the bus, his steps almost silent on the pavement. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There was something profoundly wrong with this person. His posture was too stiff, his movements too fluid, like a marionette being pulled by unseen strings. He got on the bus. The doors hissed shut behind him, sealing us in. He didn't scan a card or speak to the driver. He simply walked past him, his head slightly tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. His eyes, or where his eyes should have been beneath the hat's shadow, seemed to bore into me as he moved. He didn't sit down. Instead, he just stood there, in the middle of the aisle, facing the back of the bus, perfectly still. The air in the bus became thick, heavy, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. I could feel my breath catching in my throat. The bus started moving again, but it felt different now. The hum of the engine sounded like a growl, and the sway was more of a violent rocking. I risked a glance at the driver in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wide, fixed on the road, but I saw a tremor in his hand as he gripped the wheel. He looked terrified. My gaze flickered back to the figure in the aisle. He hadn't moved, just stood there, a silent sentinel of dread. I could feel an icy prickle on my skin, as if dozens of unseen insects were crawling over me. The feeling intensified, concentrating on my back, as if he was staring directly through the back of his hat, directly at me.
Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every creak of the bus sounded like a whispered threat. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the trench-coated figure. I desperately wanted to look away, to pretend he wasn't there, but some morbid fascination, or perhaps sheer terror, held my gaze captive. I tried to pull out my phone, but my hands were shaking too much. My fingers fumbled, dropping it onto the floor with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. As I bent down to retrieve it, my eyes met a reflection in the darkened window beside me. And there, standing right behind me, was the figure. Not in the aisle, not where he had been moments before, but directly behind my seat. His presence so close I could feel the cold radiating off him like a freezer door left ajar. I screamed, a strangled, guttural sound that tore through my throat. I scrambled up, spinning around, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. There was nothing there. The seat behind me was empty. The aisle was empty. The entire bus, save for the driver, was empty. My scream seemed to echo in the sudden void. I looked wildly around, my eyes scanning every inch of the bus, every shadowed corner. He was gone. Just gone. The driver, startled by my scream, swerved slightly, bringing the bus back under control. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, his face a mask of confusion, then concern. "Everything all right, miss?" he asked, his voice strained. I couldn't speak. I could only point, vaguely, towards the back of the bus, my hand trembling violently. He glanced back, then at me again, his brow furrowing. "There's no one else on here, miss, just you and me." He said it gently, but his eyes were wide with a fear I recognized. He knew. He had to have felt it too. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Had I hallucinated it? Was I so tired I was seeing things? But the cold, the absolute terror felt too real, too visceral to be a figment of my imagination. I insisted that he drop me off at the next possible stop, even though it was still a good 10 minutes from my apartment. He complied without argument, perhaps sensing the genuine fear in my eyes. The moment the doors opened, I practically leaped out, not even bothering to thank him. I ran, full sprint, the entire way home, not daring to look back. The image of that impossibly thin figure, his shadowed face inches from mine, burned into my retina. I never took the late-night bus again. And to this day, when I'm out late and see a bus pass by, I can't help but scan the windows, half expecting to see him, standing there, just watching.
That is a truly unsettling story, Alex. There's something inherently creepy about being alone on public transport at night, and then having that solitude invaded by something so off. Our next tale comes from Ben, and it's called The Ghost Train. My morning commute used to be the same mundane routine every day. Get up, grab a coffee, head to the subway station, and catch the 6:45 a.m. train. It was always pretty quiet at that hour. Most people hadn't started their day yet, and the platform was usually sparse. I liked it that way. It was a moment of peace before the chaos of my office job began. But one Tuesday, that peace shattered, replaced by a dread that still chills me to the bone. I arrived at the platform a few minutes early, as usual. There were only two other people there, an elderly woman engrossed in a newspaper and a young man with headphones, swaying gently to his music. The air was colder than usual, even for early morning. A strange, metallic tang hung in the air, like ozone mixed with something decaying. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me, and checked my watch. 6:43. The train should be here any moment. The rumble started, distant at first, then growing louder, echoing through the tunnel. The lights at the end of the tunnel, faint yellow eyes, grew brighter, and soon the train itself emerged. But something was wrong immediately. This wasn't the usual train. The cars looked older, dirtier, with rust streaks running down the sides that I'd never seen before. The windows were opaque with grime, making it impossible to see inside, and there was no station announcement, no flashing lights on the electronic sign above the tracks, indicating its arrival. It just slid in, silent save for the screech of its ancient brakes. The train stopped, and the doors hissed open, revealing an interior that was unnervingly dark. The lights inside flickered, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. It was completely empty. Not a single soul. Not even the driver was visible in the front car's window. The other two people on the platform seemed oblivious. The elderly woman kept reading, and the young man continued to sway to his music. Had they not noticed this wasn't right? Or was it just me? A profound sense of unease washed over me, a gut feeling screaming at me to run. But it was my train. It was 6:45. What else was I supposed to do? Hesitantly, I stepped inside. The air was frigid, colder than outside, and carried the same metallic, sickly sweet scent. As the doors began to close, I heard a faint, whispery sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or perhaps voices. too soft to make out words, just a ghostly murmur that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I chose a seat near the door, keeping my eyes fixed on the closing mechanism. As the train began to move, it didn't do so with the usual smooth acceleration. Instead, it lurched violently, throwing me against the back of the seat. The lights inside flickered more rapidly now, almost strobing, creating disorienting flashes that made the grime-streaked windows seem to ripple like water. I watched the platform disappear, and then the dark tunnel walls flew past, illuminated only by the intermittent flashes from within the train. I decided to try and distract myself, pulling out my phone, but as I held it up, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My own face stared back, pale and frightened. But behind me, in the reflection, was something else. A faint, almost transparent figure, hunched over in one of the seats further down the car. It was shadowy, indistinct, like a smudge on the glass, but it was unmistakably human-shaped. My blood ran cold. I whipped my head around to look directly at the seat where I had seen the reflection. It was empty. Just the same flickering lights and grimy surfaces.
I looked back at the window. The figure was still there, hunched, but now it seemed to be turning its head. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, its shadowy face began to rotate towards me in the reflection. I could feel a silent scream clawing its way up my throat. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that reflected horror. The face, if you could call it that, was devoid of features, just a gaping maw of darkness where eyes and mouth should be. Then the whispery voices intensified. They weren't just murmurs anymore. They were distinct, layered, coming from all around me. It sounded like a cacophony of suffering, hundreds of voices, desperate and mournful, overlapping, creating a disorienting, terrifying din. It felt like they were inside my head, clawing at my sanity. The air grew even colder, a freezing breath that seeped into my bones, chilling me to the core. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperate to make it stop, to make it all disappear. When I finally dared to open them, the train was slowing down. My stop, thank God. The doors hissed open, revealing the familiar platform. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the train as fast as my shaking legs could carry me, not looking back. The doors closed behind me with a loud, final thud, and the train, that dreadful, ancient train, began to pull away. I watched it go, the flickering internal lights casting its silhouette against the dark tunnel until it vanished from sight. I stood there, on the platform, trembling, for a long time. The other two commuters were gone. The platform was empty. My phone buzzed. It was 7 a.m. My usual train, the 6:45, was supposed to arrive at 6:45. Had I been on the ghost train for 15 minutes? Had I been on it at all? I felt profoundly disoriented, as if I had just woken from a terrible nightmare. Yet the cold still clung to my clothes, and the smell of ozone and decay was still in my nostrils. I never took the 6:45 a.m. train again. I switched to a later one, even if it meant being a bit late for work. To this day, when I'm on a subway platform and the air suddenly turns cold or the lights flicker, I feel that primal terror return, and I glance nervously down the tracks, half expecting to see those grimy windows and that empty, flickering darkness emerge from the tunnel. It haunts me, a constant reminder that sometimes the most mundane journeys can lead to the most terrifying destinations.
Ben, that sounds like something straight out of a horror movie. The idea of being alone on a train that's just not right is truly chilling. Moving on, our third story comes from Chloe, and it's titled The Uninvited Passenger. I've been taking the commuter train into the city for years. It's a long ride, about an hour and a half each way, so I've gotten used to seeing the same faces, the same routine. My preferred spot was always a window seat in one of the quieter carriages, usually with a good book or my laptop. It was my time to unwind, to mentally prepare for the day or decompress after it. But one afternoon, on the return journey, that sense of peace was shattered by an encounter that still makes my skin crawl. The train was moderately full, but not crowded. I had my usual window seat, and the seat next to me was empty. I was halfway through a captivating novel, the kind that makes you forget your surroundings, when I felt a subtle shift in the air, a drop in temperature, even though the air conditioning was consistent. I looked up, and there he was, a man, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, standing in the aisle next to my seat. He was dressed impeccably, in a slightly old-fashioned but well-tailored suit, with a neatly combed head of silver hair. He looked perfectly normal, almost distinguished, until I met his eyes. They were an unsettling shade of light blue, almost translucent, and they held an unnerving intensity. He wasn't just looking at me, he was staring. A deep, unwavering gaze that felt like it was stripping away layers of my skin, peering directly into my thoughts. He didn't ask if the seat was taken. He just sat down in the empty seat beside me. His movements were precise and deliberate. He didn't say a word, just settled in, then turned his head slowly, deliberately, to face me again, those pale eyes fixed on mine. I tried to be polite. "Hello," I offered, a small, nervous smile on my face. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just kept staring, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a cold, knowing smile. My heart began to flutter with apprehension. This wasn't just a quiet stranger. This was something else entirely. I tried to go back to my book, hoping he'd take the hint, but his presence was too overwhelming. I could feel the heat of his gaze, even without looking at him. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two, he finally spoke. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the train's gentle hum with startling clarity. "You've had a difficult day, haven't you, Chloe?" My breath hitched in my throat. My name. How did he know my name? I hadn't said it, hadn't worn a name tag. I certainly didn't know him. "Excuse me," I managed, my voice a shaky whisper. He chuckled, a low, dry sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, I know many things, Chloe, more than you can imagine. About your day, about your worries, about the little secret you've been keeping about the new project at work." My blood ran cold. The little secret he mentioned was something only my closest colleagues knew about, and it was confidential. There was no way he could have known that. I gripped my book tighter, my knuckles white. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling now. He simply smiled again, that same chilling, devoid of warmth smile. "Just a fellow traveler, Chloe. One who observes, one who understands the patterns of fate, of regret, of opportunity." He leaned closer, and I could smell something faint but acrid, like old parchment and something metallic, almost like blood. His whisper was even lower now, barely audible over the train's rhythm. "You think you're in control, don't you? Of your life, of your choices? But you're not. You're just a passenger on a journey, Chloe. And sometimes the journey has an unexpected destination planned for you." His eyes, those pale, unsettling eyes, seemed to bore into the deepest parts of my soul, and I felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over me. I was terrified. I wanted to get up, to run, to scream, but I felt paralyzed, unable to move. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. Was he a stalker? Had I encountered him before? But no. His words, his demeanor, the way he seemed to know things, it was beyond normal. It felt supernatural. He watched my panic with that same unnerving smile, as if enjoying my distress.
The train began to slow. My stop was still a good 20 minutes away, but this was an unscheduled stop, a small, forgotten station that usually only saw trains pass through without stopping. The doors hissed open. He slowly stood up, still not breaking eye contact. "Remember, Chloe," he whispered, his voice like sandpaper. "The journey isn't over until the conductor says so." And then he stepped off the train, onto the deserted platform, and walked slowly into the encroaching shadows of the station building, his figure dissolving into the gloom. The doors closed with a soft thud. The train resumed its journey, leaving me alone, gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably. I looked out the window at the receding station, but he was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. I spent the rest of the ride in a cold sweat, clutching my bag, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. When I finally reached my actual stop, I practically sprinted off the train, desperate to escape that enclosed space. I never saw him again, but his words, his chilling smile, and the way he knew my name and my secrets, they still haunt me. Every time I board a train now, I can't help but scan the faces of my fellow passengers, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. Was he just a crazy old man, or was he something more? A harbinger, a psychic? All I know is that my daily commute, once a peaceful escape, is now a constant reminder of the day I met the uninvited passenger, and the terrifying realization that some journeys have destinies we never chose.
Wow, Chloe, that's incredibly unnerving. The way he knew personal details about you without any prior contact, and then that unscheduled stop, it all adds up to something truly sinister. For our final story tonight, we have Ethan's submission, titled "The Shared Ride to Hell." I live a little outside the city, and while I have a car, sometimes traffic is so bad that using a rideshare for my morning commute just makes more sense. It's usually uneventful, a quick chat, maybe some music, and then I'm at work. But one specific Monday morning, everything about my routine was flipped upside down, and I encountered a nightmare that still makes me check my rearview mirror obsessively. I ordered a ride, and Mark was my driver. His profile picture seemed normal enough, a friendly-looking guy in his 40s. The car that pulled up was a black sedan, clean and unassuming. I hopped in the back, exchanging pleasantries as we set off. The conversation started out light. He asked about my job, and I asked about his day. Everything seemed perfectly normal, if a little quiet. But then, about 10 minutes into the ride, things started to feel off. He asked me a question that made me pause. "You live at 14 Elm Street, right?" My address. He should only know my destination, the office, not my home address. My blood ran a little cold. No, I lied, quickly, trying to play it off. "I live a few blocks from there." He just smiled, a small, knowing smirk, and nodded slowly. "Right," he said, his voice flat. "Of course." My gut clenched. That wasn't a reassuring response. The conversation after that became a one-sided interrogation. He started asking about my schedule, specific details about my job, whether I lived alone, and even what my plans were for the weekend. Each question felt like a small invasion, chipping away at my sense of safety. I tried to deflect, to give vague answers, but he pressed, sometimes repeating the question with a subtle edge that made my skin prickle. He wasn't aggressive, not overtly, but there was an unnerving intensity in his tone, a veiled threat beneath the calm exterior. I started to feel increasingly uncomfortable. I pulled out my phone, pretending to text, hoping he'd get the hint, but he just kept talking, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignoring my discomfort. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a lower register, "it's always interesting to see what people value, what they protect, what they cherish." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes briefly meeting mine. There was a glint in them, something predatory that sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly looked away, my heart pounding. I noticed we were taking a detour, not the usual route. "Hey, Mark,
I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are we going the right way? My office is usually a left back there." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, we're going the right way, Ethan. Just taking a little scenic route. Sometimes it's good to experience new things, isn't it?" He said it with such casual indifference, but his eyes in the mirror were fixed on me, and his smile had widened into a grotesque, toothy grin. My mind raced. My phone. I discreetly opened the rideshare app, intending to hit the emergency button, but the app seemed to be glitching. The map wasn't loading, and the emergency features were unresponsive. A wave of panic washed over me. I tried to unlock the doors, but they were already locked. Child locks. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. I was trapped.
"You seem a little agitated, Ethan," Mark said, his tone still calm, almost conversational, despite the horror of the situation. "Don't worry, we're almost there." Almost where? This was definitely not the direction of my office. We were on a deserted road, trees lining both sides, the houses and buildings of the city long gone. The dread was a cold, heavy stone in my stomach. "Where are you taking me?" I demanded, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. He sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sound. "Such impatience! Don't you trust your driver, Ethan? I assure you, you'll find this destination enlightening." He sped up, the car hurtling down the narrow road. I desperately scanned the windows, looking for any sign of life, any opportunity to escape. There was nothing, just endless trees and the blur of the passing scenery. I saw a small opening in the trees up ahead, a dirt path leading into a dense thicket. He was turning onto it. This was it. This was where he was taking me. I had to do something, anything. Without thinking, I smashed my fist against the window. It didn't break, but the loud thud startled Mark. He swerved, briefly losing control of the car. That was my chance. I lunged forward, grabbing the back of his seat, pulling with all my might. The unexpected force drew him off balance. The car veered sharply, slamming into a tree with a sickening crunch. The airbag deployed, hitting Mark. I was thrown forward, my head hitting the headrest, but the impact, while jarring, wasn't severe. Dazed, I quickly fumbled for the door handle. Miraculously, the impact must have jarred the lock because it clicked open. I threw the door open and scrambled out, not even looking back at the wrecked car or the dazed driver. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, blindly into the trees, not caring for scratches or thorns. I could hear Mark shouting behind me, a garbled, angry sound, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I couldn't run anymore. Eventually, I stumbled onto a main road, flagging down the first car I saw, a kind woman who helped me call the police. They found the car, but Mark was gone. The police found no records of a mark associated with that specific rideshare vehicle or its registered owner. It was as if he had simply vanished, a phantom driver. The car itself was rented to a rental company, and the person who rented it had reported it stolen days ago. The whole thing was a horrifying enigma. I never used a rideshare again. I bought a new car, and now I drive everywhere, no matter the traffic. Every time I get in my car, I lock the doors immediately, and I find myself constantly checking the rearview mirror, my heart leaping at the sight of any black sedan that looks vaguely similar. The image at Mark's predatory smile and those chilling words, "We're almost there," are burned into my memory. It was a shared ride to hell, and I was lucky to make it out alive.